Class, we finished the event of the feeding of the 5,000, and immediately after that, you find the event where Jesus walked on water. Now, this event is there in Matthew and Mark. It is not there in Luke. Okay, in Luke chapter 9, you see the feeding of the 5,000, right? All right. Right after that, you don't see Jesus walking on water there, but that's there in the other three Gospels. Now, somebody made a joke like this. Like one person went to Israel and went to as a tourist, and so he was like near the Sea of Galilee, and he asked the person who was doing the boating there, how much will it cost to go through this lake on boat? And this guy who was doing this boat riding said, it'll cost you around $100. And this tourist said, no wonder Jesus walked on the water. No wonder Jesus walked on water, because walking is cheaper than giving $100 and traveling by boat. Well, that's not why Jesus walked on the water. Okay. Well, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and told them to go ahead of him to the other side. So where exactly are they going? John tells us that they have to go to Capernaum. Okay. Check John's Gospel chapter 6. John's Gospel chapter 6 and verse 17. This is where they are supposed to go. But if you look at Mark chapter 6, where this event had taken place, what do you see there? Mark chapter 6 and verse 45. Where is the destination? Bethsaida. So Mark says the destination is Bethsaida. John says the destination is Capernaum. Which is right? Huh? No, it can't be same, man. They are two different places, Capernaum is where Peter is from. Bethsaida is where Andrew and Philip are from. Right. Capernaum is where Jesus stays. And Bethsaida is where Peter, Andrew and Philip are from. So I don't think Capernaum is also the place where James and John also stay. So they are nearby places, but they are not same. So it's like both places are near the Sea of Galilee itself. So how do you understand this? As in, where is this event of the feeding of the 5,000 taking place? Luke says that. Where is that? Bethsaida. So the event took place in Bethsaida. From Bethsaida, they are supposed to go across. So it can only mean Capernaum. So then the word in Mark chapter 6 verse 45, go ahead of him to Bethsaida. The translation to Bethsaida in our Bibles, actually when you look at the original Greek, eis ton Bethsaida, meaning over against Bethsaida. That's how the original Greek puts it. So over against Bethsaida, where they are, they have to go in an area that is against that, opposite to that. So then if Bethsaida is here, Capernaum is on that side. Okay. So this is how you should understand this. So they are on the way to what? Which place? Which place? They are from Bethsaida. Over against Bethsaida, they have to go to Capernaum. Yeah, good. So whatever these disciples are going through right now, or will go through, Jesus completely knows about that. Okay. So he dismissed the crowd told the disciples to go into the boat. Go there to the other side. And then what did he do? In verse 23, Matthew 14, verse 23. What did he do in there? To pray. To pray. Now, what is he praying for? See, now remember that his prayer has been in between two major events. The feeding of the 5,000, and what is he going to do? He's going to walk on water. So, him being a man who relies upon God's Spirit, he prays this to give thanks for what he has done, and he prays so that whatever he's going to do will positively affect the disciples. Understood? So his prayer is for the disciples here. He knows what he is sending them to. The sea is going to be turbulent, the waves are going to be against them, and so he is praying that they might not be terrified when they see him like this. Alright? This is what he was praying for. And as you see in throughout the Gospels, especially in Luke, and even in Matthew to some extent, Jesus always spend time alone in prayer. Okay? You check out Mark chapter 1. Mark chapter 1 and verse 35. Verse 35. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. So this is a constant pattern that you see in Jesus' ministry. And that's what is happening in here as well. Now, later that night, he was alone. Alright, so by evening, that is after 6 p.m., he sent the disciples, and he was alone in the night. And the boat was already a considerable distance from the land. Now, how far was this, the boat from the land? Okay, let's check what John says in here. Now, Synoptic Gospels don't include John, but still, we'll read this because this event is already there. John 6 and verse 19. What's the distance in there? 3 or 4 miles, which means around 5 to 6 kilometers or 7 kilometers, 6 kilometers. So, at what time did Jesus go there? Well, John doesn't say anything about that. But, no. See, they started the journey in the evening. But at what time did Jesus reach them? Okay. Now, let's just look at Matthew 14 or 25. It says, shortly before dawn. Correct? Meaning just before the sunlight came. That is when Jesus came to them walking. Now, if you look at Mark 6 verse 47. Does any of your translations say fourth watch of the night? Which verse is that? Huh? Mark 6 verse 48. Okay. In the NIV it's not there, but in in the vernaculars, Nalam Yamam. Yes? Yeah. Fourth watch of the night. In your vernaculars, in your Oriya Bible or in the Malayalam Bible, you will find that fourth watch of the night. Alright? So understand this thing. The Romans divided time into 2 different divisions with 4 subdivisions. Morning watch, night watch. So the morning watch was 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. first watch, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. second watch, 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. third watch, 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. fourth watch. So this is the morning watch. The night watch, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. First watch. So this is when the disciples are sent into the sea. Okay, 9 p.m. to 12 a.m. second, 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. and then 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. It is in this 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. that Jesus came walking. So for almost more than 9 hours, the disciples are in the sea. And what is happening to them? They were struggling. I mean, the wind was against them and they were struggling vehemently. Like the waves were up. The Sea of Galilee is a, a sea that is located around 200 feet below sea level, which means that violent thunderstorms and raging waves can occur immediately. You can't predict that. So this is the thing about this geography. Also, you must remember that 7 out of the 12 disciples were fishermen. So they know the sea inside out. They know how the sea behaves. But at this time, it's so terrifying for them. They are afraid. It's uncontrollable. And they're struggling. Okay, struggling for 9. So they have been rowing with all of their strength and they have only reached 6 kilometers for the last 9 hours. Okay, so Jesus knows. So Jesus is also praying for their safety. When he who is in authority over the sea is letting it happen, he's also praying for the safety of these believers or these disciples over there. Okay. Now they were expecting Jesus to come to them, but they weren't expecting Jesus to walk to them at this time. Now, is this the first time that such an instance has happened? No. Earlier it happened, but which passage is it? It's not there in It's not there in Matthew. Is it there, Matthew? Matthew 8, verse 23 to 27. At that time, Jesus was in the boat with them. But this time, Jesus is not in the boat with them, which is why they were even more afraid. Earlier, when Jesus was there, they were afraid and Jesus calmed the storm. Yeah, here he is not even there in the land. And so they thought if he comes, he will come to them in a boat. But in the fourth watch of the night, they saw him walking on the lake. What is the reaction in verse 26? Matthew 14, verse 26. Ghost. They were terrified. It's a ghost. And they cried out in fear. So, I mean, it is understood. That sort of a reaction is understood. Yeah. They weren't expecting Jesus to come like this. And they were afraid. It's a ghost. Alright. Now, let me ask you this. Why would Jesus come like this? What is he trying to prove by coming like this? By walking on water? His deity. I mean, do you remember last time when we met, we talked about the feeding of the 5,000. So there are two things that that these people are reminded about. One is what Elisha did in 2 Kings 4. So people think about Jesus like that. But people should have thought about him as the Yahweh who provided manna for the Israelites in the desert for 40 years. Alright, so that is what they had to realize. So these are the two things. Yes, he is a prophet, but more than that, he is God himself. So the disciples' hearts were also hardened at that time. I'll prove that to you. Let's turn to Mark's Gospel, chapter 6. verse 52. Hardened. So who hardened their hearts? See, God Himself. Why? So that the disciples get an extra evidence of who Jesus is. How many people witnessed the feeding of the 5,000? 20,000 plus. Okay. Out of all the people there, only 12 got to see an extra miracle that day. The 12 disciples, they saw that extra miracle. So everyone else saw it, including the disciples, the feeding of the 5,000. But that feeding of the 5,000 was meant to show to the people who Jesus was, that He is the same Yahweh God who provided for the Israelites. And to show to the disciples that He is Yahweh God, He does this. So what does Jesus say to them in verse 27? Matthew 14 verse 27. What does He say there? Take courage, it is I. ഇത് ഞാൻ തന്നെ. I am. That's how it is in the Greek. I am. Or it's like I am. I am. I am. What is that thing about I am? Yahweh. It is I. Don't be afraid. So normally in the Old Testament, when people knew that they had seen Yahweh, what is the first reaction they had? They were afraid. But here, the disciples are now seeing Yahweh. Now, people did say, Jesus did the feeding of the 5,000, yeah. But Moses did that in the Old Testament. And Jesus corrects them. Moses didn't do it. God did it. But people think, whatever Jesus is doing, there are people doing it in the Old Testament. Raising the dead, yeah, Elisha and Elijah did it. Healing the sick, Elisha did it. But let me ask you this. Walking on water, who has done it? Huh? Moses did it, but Moses never walked on water, right? How many times were the waters divided in the Old Testament? Just a question. How many say one time? Water, sea or whatever it is. One. Which is that? Yeah, Red Sea. Okay. How many of you say two times? At the time of Joshua and the Red Sea. Okay. And you say three. What is the third time? Yeah, that's the third time. That's the third time. Yeah, that's the correct one. Three times. So in all of these occurrences, the people walked on dry land. None of them walked on water. But Jesus did this, a unique miracle which is never ever seen done by man in the Old Testament. Alright? Now, what is the significance of this miracle? I'll tell you this. You can turn to Psalm 93. Psalm 93 and verse 3 and 4. Let's read that. Yeah. So, if you notice, water is the most uncontrollable force of nature. You can control fire with water, but you can't control water with fire. Sounds like a Santosh Modi dialogue, right? It's true, right? Who can control water? No one can control water. People can control wind to some extent, fire to some extent, but no one can control water. You see the um Exodus episode where the Red Sea happens, the floods in Noah's time. Okay, uh, in both these cases, man cannot do anything to stop it. He is destroyed. Water just sweeps you off your feet, but God walks on water. He is above, mightier than the thunders of the great waters. The great waters refers to the deepest seas, and the thunder of those great seas. If you have seen any videos of these ships going into the Pacific Ocean and all, you see the waves that are coming, the heights of the waves. It's so terrifying, so terrifying. But God is way above that, and to prove that, these people had to see it. So Jesus is not just like Elisha; he is the Yahweh God. Take courage. So oftentimes we talk of Peter as an impulsive guy. Eduthiyattakaran. Okay, like we say he doesn't think before saying anything, or often we say that. But actually not. Out of the 12 disciples, he was the only guy who had the courage to walk on water at least. What were the other 12 doing? Oh, what were the other 11 doing? They were inside the boat, not having the faith that this guy had. So don't call him an impulsive guy because he had what others didn't have. Now, Lord, if it is you, tell me to come to you on the water. And Jesus said, come. So Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. Okay. Now, what happened? For a moment, he took his eyes off Jesus and looked at the wind. And what is going to happen? He was afraid and he began to sink. So, I guess this is where we get one lesson here. In the problems allowed by God, if we look at the problems, we will have a fear that will destroy us. But if we look at the God who is in control of those problems, that will strengthen us to go forward in the midst of the problems that He allows. Okay? If you're looking at the problems only, you will be worried and you will be affected by that. So, what happened? What a shameful thing it is to sink in the very same place that he worked all of his life. He spent most of his life fishing in this lake. Okay, and he is going to sink in this very lake, not able to swim. He knows swimming. He knows swimming, but he can't swim in the lake that he has done business in. So what did Jesus do? Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? At least he had little faith. Others had zero faith. So even if he had little faith, that doesn't excuse him from the doubt that he had. He could have looked forward and just looked at Jesus himself. And so when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. What happened in verse 33? Yeah. Yeah. So this is the reaction that is expected from such a vision. Okay, and this is the thing that they had to understand. He is not just a prophet. Look at the other passage, John's Gospel, chapter 6 and verse 15. John 6, verse 15. Okay, look, before 15, let's read verse 14. Yeah, and then 15 also. Okay. So, in this, when people think about him only as a prophet and only as a king, what does Jesus call himself, or what does Jesus want to prove about himself? He is the Son of God. He is the Yahweh himself, okay, along with the Father and with the Holy Spirit. And this extra event enabled the disciples, these 12, to stand with Jesus. If you look at John's Gospel, chapter 6, the chapter begins with 20,000 plus people. Just so that you understand this. 20,000 people, okay? John 6. So John 6 verse 2 says, a great crowd followed him. Correct? And then in verse 22, crowd. Where is the great crowd? Where is great? There is reduced. Okay? And then whatever Jesus said from verse 25 to 59, at whatever Jesus said to them, they start grumbling. The very same people who ate the food that he gave, they start grumbling against him. Verse 41. And arguing sharply among themselves. So, the people, the Jews who came and ate food from him, they listen to what he is saying about himself and they go away. And then, verse 60. Many of the disciples who walked with Jesus. Okay, Jesus didn't have just 12 disciples, he had almost 70 of them. So, the disciples also were grumbling about this, not the 12, huh? The other disciples. They were grumbling about this. And then what happened? In verse 66, from this time many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. So, this chapter started with 20,000 plus, and now it's only 12. And Jesus asked to the 12, you do not want to leave too, do you? Jesus asked, do you want to leave? Simon Peter asked, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life, and we have come to believe and to know that you are the Holy One of God. So, how did Peter get that conviction? That extra miracle that these 12 saw. Okay? That extra miracle of Jesus walking on the water, which they saw, and Jesus being rescued personally from the water by Peter, makes Peter say this about Jesus. And among the 12, there is a devil. And that is Judas Iscariot. Alright, so you see that this chapter starts with 20,000 plus who are saying, praise be to Jesus, praise be to Jesus. And then at the end of, when Jesus talks about himself, only 11 guys are there who are loyal to Jesus. Okay, so come back to Matthew chapter 14. So they they went and crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret. So the place at Gennesaret is where a lot of people came bringing their sick to him. They begged him to let the sick touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. So a lot of miracles were happening in the land of Gennesaret. Okay, so this is after they had gone to Capernaum. So John says they reached Capernaum. So after Capernaum, they go to Gennesaret, and this is where these events happen. So whatever you're going to read now in Matthew 15 verse 1 to 20 is also there in Mark 7 verse 1 to 23. So the parallel passage for this is found in Mark 7 verse 1 to 23. So that this passage is not there in Luke. So what we're going to do is we're going to just compare Matthew and Mark on this, and we will discuss about this. Now, Gennesareth is where they are. Some Pharisees and the teachers of the law came to Jesus from Jerusalem. So almost 60 kilometers they come, traveling from Jerusalem to Gennesareth. So Jerusalem is in the southern area of the Judean province. See, remember, Judea, Samaria, Galilee. This is how the geography of um, Israel happens. This is how the geography of Israel happens. So these Pharisees and the teachers of the law, they travel northwards from Judea to Galilee. Gennesareth is in Galilee. And what are they going to ask? They ask about the disciples, right? What do they ask? They don't wash their hands before they eat. So imagine this. A group of people come traveling 60 kilometers just to ask this. Huh? They have a tradition like this. Now, what is that tradition here? Now, Matthew doesn't tell that. Why? Because the audience of Matthew knows what the tradition is. But when Mark is writing to the Romans and the Greeks, they don't know what that tradition is all about. So, Mark in chapter 7, verse 3 and 4 details those traditions so that the audience will have a background regarding the problem that is being recorded in here. Morning. Yeah. So the problem here that is being recorded is in verse 3 and 4. The Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they give their hands a ceremonial washing, holding to the tradition of the elders. When they eat, when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. And they observe many such traditions, many other traditions such as washing of cups, pitchers, kettles, and dining couches. Now, these guys talk about the traditions of the elders. Like when they come to the marketplace, they don't eat until they give their hands a ceremonial washing. Now, this is what their older folks did. Now, my question is, how did they start this practice? Is this practice there in the Old Testament? No. Then where did they get this practice from? Where did they get this practice from? I mean, there is no clear commandment in the Old Testament where people are supposed to have a ceremonial washing of their hands when they come from the marketplace. Washing of the hands is good before you eat. But when did this become a command that everyone had to do it religiously? Now, the Old Testament has, as I said, no particular reference regarding this. Then, how did this come out? The only reference of washing of hands comes in the book of Exodus, chapter 30, if I'm not wrong. Yes, 30 verse 17 to 21. So, my guess is that these people, these elders, these guys are talking about the tradition of their elders. So, those elders, in order to try to apply the Old Testament law in their times, what they did was they looked at this passage and said, when everyone comes from the marketplace where Gentiles are there and everyone is there, they should cleanse themselves of that ceremonial uncleanness of associating with the Gentiles and then eat their food. But my question here is this commandment found in Exodus 30 verse 17 to 21, is this commandment supposed to be followed by everyone? Look at this passage. Who are to wash their hands and feet from this water? Aaron and his sons. Whenever they enter the tent of meeting, they shall wash with water so that they will not die. So, this commandment of washing their hands and feet is with regard to the priests of the family of Aaron who minister in the temple, not to everyone. But what has happened now? This commandment, which is supposed to be only for the priests, has been misapplied to everyone. So, a commandment which God never intended for everyone is made as a commandment, followed by generations, and now used to question others. This is what has happened. And now, this is why these people have traveled 60 kilometers just to talk to them on this. Alright? Now, what does Jesus say to them? In verse 3, 4, 5, and 6. Read. 3, 4, 5, and 6. Matthew 15, verse 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Jesus replied, "And why do you break the command of God for the sake of your tradition? For God said, honor your father and mother, and anyone who calls his father or mother is to be put to death. But you say that if anyone declares that what might have been used to help their father or mother is devoted to God, they are not to honor their father or mother. Thus, you nullify the word of God for the sake of your tradition. You hypocrite, I say over like 12.
Okay. That's enough. I'll come to that. So, what Jesus is doing here is that Jesus is scolding them for giving so much of importance to an unwritten law. They are giving so much of importance to an unwritten law, and at the same time, they are nullifying or giving less focus on what God has actually commanded. What did God command in here? Honor your father and mother. Where do you find that? In the Ten Commandments, in Exodus 20, verse 12. Yeah? And then, anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death. Leviticus 20, verse 9. And Exodus 21, verse 17. So these are written commandments of God in the Bible. This hand washing is never written. They have assumed it. What is actually written is ignored. How is it ignored? I'll tell you how it is ignored. What these teachers of the law and the Pharisees do is that they have made some traditions. As in, suppose Babylon says, okay, I am supposed to take care of my father with this money. Babylon decides, I am going to give this money to the temple. I have devoted this money to God. So the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, what they say, okay, so you are giving your money to the temple. Since you do that, you are no longer required to take care of them because you dedicated that money to what? Temple. Where did this tradition come from? It's not there in the Old Testament. Honor your father and mother is a long lasting commandment. But These guys have made traditions, human traditions, that nullify the word of God. So um, the old father and mother who were supposed to be taken care of, now they don't have any means to be taken care of. Why? Because this guy has already pledged that money to be in the temple. So this guy is also free from his job. The temple gets money. So the priests are happy. This guy is happy. See? So they make traditions to fill their pocket, and that tradition he misuses to get rid of his parents. Now, the priests themselves say, since you gave this money to this temple, you are now free from the responsibility of taking care of your father and mother. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that's religious exploitation here. That's what is happening in here. In the name of the temple. The temple was good. Zerubbabel created the temple or built the temple for the worship to happen. But now what is happening? In the name of the temple, looting is happening or stealing is happening. Holy thieves. Okay? And this is not the only thing that they do. Mark 7 verse 13 says, and you do many things like this. Not just this. There are many things that is happening in the name of tradition that you guys made, which cancels what God actually said and upholds what God didn't say. So what is happening is they have made rules, man-made rules, and they look at them equal to scriptures. And when the choice comes whether to obey the written law of God or the traditions of man, they give more weightage to the traditions of man and they ignore the written law. What is happening here is these guys are talking about hand washing, which is a good thing. In itself, is a good thing. But hand washing doesn't make somebody acceptable to God. God never said anything of that. So, about these guys, Isaiah was right when he prophesied. They are hypocrites. Now, you know whom is Jesus calling hypocrites? The teachers of the law and the Pharisees, the religious leaders of that time. He is calling them hypocrites. I mean, it takes so much of guts to call such people like that. Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites. What did he say? So he's talking from Isaiah 29 verse 13. He's quoting that here. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. You have let go of the commandment of God and are holding on to human traditions. Okay, so uh, Jesus opens up what is their problem. They look decent and religious on the outward, but their hearts are way away from God. They come to the temple every year. They go to the synagogue every week. They fast twice a week. They give tithes of all that they possess. They are not involved in adultery. They are not involved in uh, extortion or all that. But see how bad they are. Can a good person on the outside be bad on the inside? Obviously, yes. And then what did Jesus say? He calls the crowd to him and he announces. He announces something which they should understand. Okay. Now what does he say? Verse 10 and 11.
anything what comes out of their mouth that is not.
Yeah. Now, uh, Jesus tells them what is the real source of defilement. Eating with unwashed hands does not spiritually defile a person. Suppose you eat something without washing your hands. What does it do to you, to your behavior? Nothing. It doesn't do anything to your personality. You know what it does to your body? You will have a stomach upset and you will have to take some medicines to heal that. Take an injection or something. But otherwise, your behavior is not changed, right? That's why Jesus said, what goes into someone's mouth does not defile them spiritually. What comes out of their mouth, that is what defiles them, not vomit. So, what did he intend to say? What comes out from their mouth actually comes out of the heart. The heart thing was mentioned in verse 8, and that is also talked about in verse 19. For out of the heart comes evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. This is what defile a person. These are what defiles a person. But eating with unwashed hands does not defile them. So when the crowd left, the disciples came to him and asked, do you know that the Pharisees are offended when they heard this? As in, the disciples asked, why did you go and have to make a trouble with those guys? They already are hating you. Why did you have to keep poking them? Because for the disciples, Jesus speaks. And Jesus defends the disciples by saying these things and that thing which he said, there's a tight slap on their face. In front of the crowds, he called them hypocrites. Now, will they just sit idle? വെറുതെ ഇരിക്കുമോ ഇത്? No, they were offended. Now, what if Jesus was just like any of us? What will he do? He'll be worried about that. He will be worried. What will those guys do to me? What should I do to protect myself? These are the sort of things which we will think. Should I say sorry to him? Should I ask for forgiveness? Okay, these are things which will come in our minds. Okay, so we'll continue our topic in our next class next week. Okay.